and explaining Act 2 of Macbeth again because as a master in structure, yep, here we go. This is going live straight off the top of the dome. So if I make mistakes, y'all are going to hear it. I'm sorry. So as a master instructor, I have apparently managed to delete my old video of me reading and explaining Macbeth. So we're going to go ahead and open up my PowerPoint of Act 2 of Macbeth. And I will now attempt in my own way to recreate the reading, the explanation, all the wonderful things that you guys come to me for. So at the end of Act 1, just by way of quick summary, we've seen Macbeth introduced. The story as told by others is that he is a great man. He is a hero. He is the savior of Scotland who defeats two armies that invade his country in a single day. The king calls him a hero. The soldiers call him a hero. He's given new titles. His thainship, which means the land that he controls and gets money from and soldiers from, is expanded. He is moving up in a great big way, but it's not to last very, very long. By the end of the scene, we've seen the man, the myth, the legend decide that, well, he also really, really wants to be king. And since the idea was planted in his head by some potentially helpful witches, he's now, along with his wife, engaged in a plan to murder the sitting King Duncan and put himself on the throne instead. So our scene begins, interestingly, not with Macbeth. Shakespeare loves to delay the main character's entry into scenes and plays and acts. So instead, we begin with Banquo, and we see Banquo here. You need to understand that, like, during Shakespeare's time, he performed these in the Globe Theater, which was an outdoor theater. So you only were able to put on plays when the sun was shining bright and the weather permitted. So if you were going to have a nighttime scene, you needed to have a couple of people walking on stage being like, man, sure is dark tonight, in order to convey to the audience who's watching this play in broad daylight, oh yeah, it must be nighttime in the play. So to engage our imaginative faculties, we see Banquo and his son Fleance, who's carrying a torch in front of him, enter onto our stage. Banquo asks his son, how goes the night, boy? How's it going tonight? And his son gives a rather interesting reply. The moon is down. I've not heard the clock. So the moon going down and the child not having heard the clock chime the times, it's an uncertain time. This works thematically, as Macbeth is now preparing to murder Duncan, is also a fairly uncertain time for the nation of Scotland. She goes down at 12, says Banquo. So Banquo infers from the fact that the moon is no longer in the sky that it must be after midnight. Banquo believes it is much. I'm sorry, Fleance believes it is much later. I take it 'tis later, sir. Banquo then says, hold my sword. There's husbandry in heaven. Their candles are all out. Take thee that too. A heavy summon lies upon. Geez, oh Pete, I'm murdering this. I'm gonna slow down and try to do a good job. Reading Shakespeare is not always easy. Here's me reading Shakespeare for you. Take thee that too. A heavy summon lies like lead upon me, and yet I would not sleep. Merciful powers restrain in me the cursed thoughts that nature gives way to in repose. So there's a lot going on here. We see Duncan on my brain. We see Banquo and his child talking about how dark it is. And in the audience, for everybody who's heard every word of the play so far, that should put our mind in memory of both Macbeth and Lady Macbeth saying essentially prayers for darkness to come and cover up the wicked deeds that are in their minds and in their hearts. Here we see Banquo looking up at the night sky, and he says there's husbandry in heaven, that someone whose mind is in the energy bill has put out all of the candles of heaven so that they could burn at another time. It is completely and totally pitch dark. And it being pitch dark, Banquo, after the party in celebration of their great victory, would like to go to sleep, but he's afraid to sleep. And he's begging the powers of heaven to protect him from the cursed thoughts that prey on his mind while he is drifting off to sleep. Remember, Macbeth wasn't the only one that the witches talked to. Banquo also had a prophecy that foretold that even though he would not be king, his children would be. And being a man like any other man, this has awakened certain temptations in him that he would rather avoid. Banquo doesn't want to think about potentially murdering his king. As such, he is not particularly enthused at the prospect of sleep. Moving forward, we now see Macbeth enter. A servant is with him who also has a torch. Banquo says, "Give me my sword. Who's there?" Now, this is a trick that those of you who read Hamlet as a senior will also see. The uncertainty of who's there can work on a couple of levels. One, it's dark. They don't know who they're actually talking to. They cannot see their hands in front of their face, let alone the person that they see approaching them, or they hear approaching them, I should say. And this notion of who's there also works on the level of who am I really talking to? Is this someone I can trust? Macbeth answers somewhat dishonestly, a friend. Banquo, recognizing the voice, says, "What, sir? Not yet at rest. The king's abed. He hath been an unusual pleasure, and sent forth great largesses to your office. This diamond he greets your wife withal, by name of most kind hostess, and shut up in measureless content." So this is perhaps the other thing than his sword that Banquo had asked Fleance to hold for him. It's a sizable diamond that, in his generosity and his gratitude, King Duncan, before going to bed, asked that Banquo present to Lady Macbeth for playing the role of most gracious hostess. And everyone in the audience can just enjoy the delicious irony of her being given this gift by him, as we know she's plotting his death. Macbeth, speaking to the idea that this was perhaps not the most welcome of surprises, says, "Being unprepared, our will became servant to defect, which else should free have wrought." So I'm afraid we made kind of a dog's dinner of this welcome for the king. We didn't know he was coming. We were not prepared, but we would happily have welcomed here otherwise. Banquo then tells him everything's cool, all is well. And then there's a break in the conversation as Banquo turns it towards something that's perhaps more meaningful, or at least more on his mind than are they being good hosts to Duncan and everyone. "I dreamt last night of the three weird sisters. To you they have shown." And Macbeth's reply here is interesting. Remember earlier he said that he wanted to talk to Banquo about the witches, but instead he simply says, "I think not of them. And entreat an hour to serve, we would spend it in some words upon that business, if you would grant the time." So Macbeth lies, says he hasn't been thinking about the witches, but yeah, if you want to talk about them later, maybe we should have a conversation about that. Banquo is pleased by this response and says, "At your kindest leisure." Then Macbeth, again, there's an interesting line here. "If you shall cleave to my consent when 'tis, I shall make honor for you." In my head, this always puts me in mind of two people who don't quite know each other as well as perhaps they wish they did, trying to feel out how far they can trust the other one. Macbeth has seen how far Banquo will go with him if he proposes something that's maybe not altogether honorable. So he says, "If you listen to me, I'll take care of you," in that line. And Banquo's response is kind of walking on both sides of the fence, or speaking out of both sides of his mouth. "So I lose none in seeking to augment it, but still keep my bosom franchised and my allegiance clear. I shall be counseled." So Banquo says as long as he doesn't have to do anything too dirty in terms of betraying his allegiance to the king or his allegiance to God, he'll hear whatever Macbeth has to say. That's enough of an answer for Macbeth. He says, "Good night, good repose the while. Thanks, sir, and the like to you." And Banquo and Fleance leave. So for the class versions, I had film excerpts of the 2015 version of Macbeth. It won't play on this version of the PowerPoint. Plus, I'd probably get copyright infringement strikes from YouTube. So we're just going to keep it moving. There are a great many resources available for those who are online and wishing to find excerpts and scenes from Macbeth. Simply type in the act and the scene, and you'll find yourself sometimes overwhelmed with the number of versions that have been produced out there. And it's definitely not a bad thing. After Banquo is gone, Macbeth turns to the servant and says, "Go, bid thy mistress, when my drink is ready, strike upon the bell. Get thee to bed." So Macbeth gets rid of the witness that he has in the room with him, but there's also him telling the servant, go and let me, my lady know that when she's ready to give me the signal to do what we talked about earlier. But this, again, is a fairly significant deviation from the plot that had been broached for Macbeth in Act One. Remember, early in Act One, Lady Macbeth says, leave this night's business completely to me. I'll take care of everything. And then later on, she and Macbeth are going to go tandem to go kill Duncan. Now, Macbeth's all by himself. And she's just going to give him the signal to go and do the work that's got to be done. The servant leaves, and we get what is, for a lot of people reading along, like one of the tougher scenes to get into. It's easy to do like suspense and horror. I shouldn't say easy. It's easier to understand suspense and horror when you're watching a play or when it's been translated into the medium of film. But as we're just reading this next scene is supposed to be a little bit unnerving, not just for Macbeth, but for us in the audience as well. It's written to be ambiguous. There's a number of different things that could be going on here, none of which are we ever given any clarity on by our author. It's simply how we can engage with it with our imagination. So all I ask is that you engage with this using your imagination, and we do our best to understand. So as Macbeth is now alone on stage contemplating his soon-to-be murder of Duncan, he sees a dagger in the air floating in front of him. Is this a dagger which I see before me? The handle towards my hand. Come, let me clutch thee. I have thee not, and yet I see thee still. Art thou not fatal vision, sensible to feeling as to sight? Or are thou but a dagger of the mind, a false creation proceeding from the heat oppressed brain? So I'm making choices as I'm reading this. You could read Macbeth as completely horrified, terrified. He's seeing a dagger floating in the air. Most of us would see that as something that is not altogether comfortable. Most of us would be rather unnerved by the dagger floating in the middle of the air. But there are certain lines that come later in Act 3 that speak to the idea of Macbeth seeing things that aren't there as being somewhat normal. Now, there's a lot of different things you could point to for this, but I give Shakespeare credit for being a fairly keen observer of humanity. He writes things that a lot of times resonate with audiences today that he wrote back in the 1500s. And even though they didn't have the term PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder, I believe that Shakespeare probably was a good enough observer to know sometimes soldiers came back from war wrong, that their brains didn't work the way they had before they went and endured the trauma of the bloodshed and the horror that they experienced at war. And it would not surprise me if he put a little bit of that into the character of Macbeth, that this is someone who's had to do horrific things. In Act One, we saw him unseam MacDonald the traitor from nave to chops. He splits him in half, starting from the belly and going up, and then he chops off his head. Macbeth has been marked by that violence, perhaps, and then you could read it that way. There are other options here, though. This could be entirely Macbeth's fantasy, his imagination running away with him as he goes to do the uncomfortable act of murdering someone. It could be the witches messing with him. It could be a sign from God trying to communicate something to him. It could be any of that. It could be something my imagination has not yet considered. And Shakespeare doesn't tell us. And that's part of what makes it so fun, is we get to make in the movie of our mind and our imaginations what we think it should be. So as I'm reading this, I see Macbeth as not being horrified or frightened or terrified by this floating dagger. He's dealt with this sort of thing before, and he approaches it the same way he approaches his other visions. First, can I touch you? Are you real? And then what do you mean if I can't? I see thee yet, in form as palpable as that which now I draw. Thou marshallest me the way I was going, and such an instrument I was to use. Mine eyes are made the fools of the other senses, or else worth all the rest. I see thee still, and on thy blade and dudgeon gouts of blood, which was not so before. There's no such thing. It is the bloody business which informs thus to mine eyes. So it's kind of fun in this soliloquy. We get to see Macbeth processing information as he honestly would. He sees the dagger. He asks, is it a hallucination? He tries to touch it, and he cannot. But the dagger seems to be moving. The dagger seems to be drawing him, a dagger drawn, if you will, towards Duncan's sleeping chamber, Duncan's bedroom. And Macbeth is trying to figure out why he's seeing this. And as he's looking at the dagger as it floats towards Duncan's room, or points towards Duncan's room, the dagger itself changes. Now he sees that over the blade and the hilt and the handle, it's all covered with blood. And that must be somewhat disturbing to him. And we know he rejects it. There is no such thing. I'm only imagining this because of what I'm about to go do. As he's on his way towards Duncan's burial chamber, he's meditating on the darkness that surrounds him and the fact that it's night and that darkness feels right for what he's about to do. But darkness isn't the only thing that he's concerned with now. Now we're the one half world, nature seems dead, and wicked dreams abuse the curtained sleep. Witchcraft celebrates pale Hecate's offerings, and withered murder, alarmed by his sentinel, the wolf, who howls his watch. Thus, with his steady pace, with Tarquin's ravishing strides towards his design, moves like a ghost. There's a ton of illusion there. I'm not sure it's necessary to really understand what he's talking about. He's simply saying, it's dark. This is my opportunity. And this is the time when bad and evil and wicked things happen. Therefore, this is time for me to do what I have to do. And as he moves, it's not just darkness that he needs. Thou sure and firm set earth, hear not my steps, which way they walk, for fear thy very stones prate of my whereabouts, and take the present horror from this time, which now suits with it, whilst I threat he lives. Words the heat of deeds too cold breath gives. So, Macbeth, he's begging the ground on which he's walking to hide his steps, make it so that he can move silently. And as he's praying, he prays that something in the darkness or the ground or something around him can take the fear that he feels inside of himself as he's going forward. But then he resolves himself to his action. Whiles I threat, he lives. Words to the heat of deeds too cold breath gives. I butchered it the second time through. But he's saying that I just need to do this. I just need to go. I'm here talking. He's still alive. Talking makes it less likely that I'm going to do what I have to do. As he says that, the bell rings in the distance, the signal from Lady Macbeth to let him know that it's time to go do what he said he's going to do. I go, and it is done. The bell invites me. Hear it not, Duncan, for it is a knell that summons thee to heaven or to hell. So you get an interesting reversal. We saw with the witches in Act 1 that when they decided it was time to go, it wasn't their choice to leave, that it was the familiar spirits of their animal companions that actually called them away. Here, there's a similar thing happening with Macbeth. It's not his choice. It's not his decision. It's the bell that summons him. The bell invites him. And he's going to do what he's going to do, but he can still pray. He can still hope for things that aren't entirely bad. So hear it not, Duncan. It's a knell that summons thee to heaven or to hell. And it is interesting. Whereas earlier Macbeth was happy to speak of Duncan's good qualities and how the murder of Duncan would bring the angels themselves to condemn the murderer, and the people would rise up against the one responsible for his death. Now, Macbeth at least voices a certain ambivalence. a certain uncertainty about whether or not Duncan will actually go to the good place or to the bad place. Macbeth walks off stage, and we get another remarkable change. So once again, I had put in a couple of videos here. On this side, we've got the dagger scene as performed by, and now I'm totally blanking his name. On this side, we got the 2015 version. On this side, we got the Denzel Washington that was just released on Apple TV. Once again, you can YouTube this stuff. That's where I found these videos. There are quite a few out there. They're both different versions, different readings. The 2015 version is particularly interesting because it goes beyond what the scene and the text actually shows us. After the dagger scene in the 2015 Fassbender version, we in the audience have to watch the horrific murder of Duncan. And then actually they take some of the lines from later in the play when he's running Malcolm out of town. He says them to Malcolm, who has walked in on him sitting with the murdered Duncan. It's a lot less ambiguous in terms of that relationship. So once again, there's always different ways of doing Shakespeare. I encourage you to look at a lot of different perspectives on how to do it. And that way your imagination can make the story you want it to be. Because in the actual play, we don't see the murder of Duncan. I think Shakespeare deliberately withholds the violence of the play. We've only ever seen in this play people coming on stage speaking of violence, describing violence. We haven't yet had to witness it. And I think that's because he's trying to set up the first killing that we do see on stage as to be particularly horrific, particularly shocking. Because Shakespeare otherwise was not particularly averse to withholding violence from his storytelling. So we cut away from Macbeth, who goes off to get stabby with Duncan, and instead we cut to Lady Macbeth. And the key to remember here is when it comes to the character of Lady Macbeth is that she is all about appearances. So much so that she'll even try to talk herself into the mind frame that she thinks she needs. Lady Macbeth enters and says, "That which hath made them drunk hath made me bold. What hath quenched them hath given me fire." So she rolls in, and right away she's saying the guards are drunk, but she's a little tipsy. She's feeling it. She's feeling bold. She's feeling excited. She can do some stuff right now. But then in the next breath, she jumps. "Hark, peace!" It was the owl that shrieked, the fatal bellman which gives the sternest good night. So there's a noise that's implied off stage, and she responds to it by being frightened. She's not at her heart what she's trying to pretend to be on the surface. Now she moves on to thinking about Macbeth. He's about it. The doors are open, and the surfeited grooms do mock their charge with snores. I have drugged their posits. That death and nature do contend about them whether they live or die. So you see, she's moved on to like fairly cold-blooded Lady Macbeth. She's gotten the guards drunk. She also drugged them in addition just to make sure they would not wake up at an inopportune time. But then again, off stage, we hear Macbeth's voice. "Who's there? What ho?" And Lady Macbeth's immediate response to hearing her husband's voice is to assume he's failed. "Alack, I'm afraid they have awakened, and 'tis not done. The attempt and not the deed confounds us. Hark, I laid their daggers ready. He could not miss them. Had he not resembled my father when he slept, I had done it." So like right away, Lady Macbeth's first thought is, it's messed up. It's messed up. Did the guards wake up? Did I screw this up? No, Macbeth must have screwed this up. How could he screw this up? I left the daggers there. The guards were knocked out. How could he screw this up? I would have done it myself if he hadn't looked like my dad. And so now we get another reason for why the plan changed. Instead of her doing it, or instead of them going tandem to do it, Macbeth had to do it by himself because Duncan, asleep, looked too much like her dad for her to stab. Macbeth now comes on stage, and the idea here is, again, it's dark, it's night, they can't see each other terribly well. Frequently in the staging of this, you'll see Macbeth has daggers in his hands that he's not supposed to have with him, because the plot was we were supposed to plant those daggers and frame the guards for the murder of Duncan. When Macbeth comes in, she figures out who it is and she says, "My husband." And Macbeth has good news. "I have done the deed. Didst thou hear a noise? Didst thou not hear a noise? I heard the owl scream and the crickets cry. Did not you speak? When? Now? As I descended, I. Hark! Who lies in the second chamber? Donalbain. This is a sorry sight." So they go from this kind of, it's an amazing juxtaposition, putting these two things right next to each other, where you get like a really dark scene. Macbeth comes on stage, bloodied hands, having just murdered his king, and then you get almost like the old comedy routine of Abbott and Costello, where two guys who would have a conversation about a starting baseball team. And the joke that starts it off was there's a first baseman whose name was Who. And so the person would ask, "Who's on first?" And the other guy would say, like, "Well, that's right." And you get this kind of who's on first discussion there about, like, did you hear anything between Lady Macbeth and Macbeth? And this adds like a really dark spice of humor to this kind of frightening scene, in that these guys are not master criminals. They really don't have their act together at all. And again, play within your imagination just the reality of Macbeth. "I have done the deeds." Looking at his hands, this is a sorry sight. And Lady Macbeth's appearances, a foolish thought to say a sorry sight. There's one did laugh in his sleep, and another one cried murder, that they did wake each other. I stood and heard them. They did say their prayers and addressed them again to sleep. There's two lodged together. And one cried, "God bless us," and amen the other, as they had seen me with these hangman's hands, listening their fear. I could not say amen when they did say, "God bless us." Consider it not so deeply. But wherefore could I not pronounce amen? I had most need of blessing, and amen stuck in my throat. These deeds must not be thought on. These deeds must not be thought after these ways. So it will make us, I just totally screwed up reading that. Let me try it one more time. These deeds must not be thought after these ways. All right, one more time. There's an unnecessary punctuation there. I don't know if, like, when I copied and pasted this, I hit a button or something, but we're going to take that out of there. It's messing up the way I read this. These deeds must not be thought after these ways, so it will make us mad. So Macbeth is clearly upset here, and he's got, especially in the minds of the audience, reason to be upset. He overheard the two people, one of whom was Duncan's son, in the room next door, wake themselves up after he had murdered Duncan, and then say a prayer before going back to sleep. And he tried to say amen, and he couldn't say it. Now, for most of us in the modern audience, it's like, well, duh, like, God's going to want to hear from you, you murdering guy. But I don't think that's the entirety of it. In Shakespeare's time, the audience, at least in large part, believed that inability to pray, the stoppage of prayer, was a sign of the devil working in someone's life, or a witch inflicting trouble upon them. And so, as such, this could be read in a number of different ways, with Macbeth being freaked out about the fact that he couldn't pray when he really needed God's help. And Lady Macbeth's response to that is, stop thinking about it. But Macbeth can't stop thinking about it. "Methought I heard a voice cry, 'Sleep no more. Macbeth does murder sleep, the innocent sleep the sleep that knits up the raveled sleeve of care, the death of each day's life, sore labor's bath, the balm of hurt minds, great nature's second course, chief nourisher in the feast.'" Now, this might be a nod back to those witches. Do you remember in the opening of the play where there was a sailor that they were going to torment? He would ship out on his vessel, and they make sure that vessel found no peace, no safe harbor. For years they were going to torment him, and that meant he would never know sleep. They would drain him dry as hay, they said. Even though they didn't have the power to kill him, they could make him wish he was dead. And here is Macbeth hearing a voice saying, "Macbeth shall sleep no more." Is he the captain of the vessel? He's not on a ship, but he's been called a captain during the fighting by Duncan, our captains, Macbeth and Banquo. It's interesting to think about. Shakespeare never tells us what's what. And Lady Macbeth is just confused by what her husband is saying. Oh, no. There we go. Macbeth still freaking out. It cried, "Sleep no more," to all the house. "Glamis has murdered sleep, and therefore Cawdor shall sleep no more. Macbeth shall sleep no more." Lady Macbeth, who heard none of this, who was it that thus cried? "My worthy Thane, you do unbend your noble strength to think so brain sickly of things. Go, get some water and wash this filthy witness from your hand." So Lady Macbeth asks him, "Who said this?" Then, "You do unbend your noble strength. You're not acting like the strong man I know you to be. To think so brain sickly of things." That's just a great word to use. And then her answer is, once again, "Let's fix our appearances. Go, get some water. Wash this filthy witness from your hand. Wash your hands and it's over with. No one can put this on you." As she's going to his hands, she now realizes he's holding the daggers from the murder scene. "Why did you bring these daggers from the place? They must lie there. Go carry them and smear the sleepy grooms with blood." "I'll go no more. I'm afraid to think what I have done. Look on it again, I dare not." Macbeth is not going back there. He screwed up. He brought the daggers with him that he was supposed to plant there, but he cannot go back there and look at what he did. So Lady Macbeth steps up for her man. "Infirm of purpose, give me the daggers. The sleeping and the dead are but as pictures. 'Tis the eye of childhood that fears the painted devil. If he do bleed, I'll gild the faces of the grooms withal, for it must seem their guilt." And she exits. And as she walks out from somewhere in the castle, we hear a kind of foreboding knock. This adds tension. This is creates, if you will, a ticking clock. There's a new thing that they have to deal with now that they've murdered Duncan and ostensibly planted the evidence. But before we get into who's knocking and why, Lady Macbeth's language here is pretty interesting. She goes off on her husband, infirm, and that's, again, just going after his manhood. Isn't a man supposed to be hard? Double entendre intended there. He is infirm. He is limp and incapable. She does it herself. "Give me the daggers." And then she says he's essentially a child with the way he's behaving. The sleeping the dead are just pictures, and only a child is scared of a picture of the devil. There's nothing in that room to be scared of. It's just a body. So she goes to do the business that Macbeth was supposed to do. When she's gone, Macbeth first is like, "Whence is that knocking?" And then he's dealing with this emotion that seems he's fairly unfamiliar with. How is it with me when every noise appalls me? He's not used to being scared. What hands are here? They pluck out my eyes. Will great Neptune's ocean wash all this blood clean from my hand? No, this my hand will rather make the multitudinous seeds incarnadine, making the green one red. So Macbeth goes from like, why am I so scared? Why is it that every noise is frightening me? And then he looks at his hands and he's like, oh, can I ever wash these clean? Will these ever be clean again? I don't think there's enough water in the ocean. If I tried, I would turn the entire green ocean red. Lady Macbeth then storms back in, her hands now just as bloody and red as Macbeth's. And she's got some rather unkind words for him. "My hands are of your color, but I shame to wear a heart so white." And then the knocking comes again. "I hear a knocking at the south entry. Retire we to our chamber. A little water clears us of this deed. How easy it is then! Your constancy hath left you unattended." Again, Lady Macbeth goes to her tool. She's got one tool for dealing with this. Fix your outside, and it'll be fine. The knocking comes again. Maybe. "Hark! More knocking. Get on your nightgown, lest occasion call us, and show us to be watchers. Be not lost so poorly in your thoughts." To know my deed were best not to know myself. Wake Duncan with thy knocking, I would thou couldst. So again, Lady Macbeth, she's trying to fix their appearances. Hey, we need to get our clothes on, otherwise it's going to show out that we've been still not to bed yet. So we got to put our nightgowns on. Let's wash our hands. Don't just stand there, dude. Let's go. And Macbeth wishes he could forget what he has done. And then the knocking comes again, and he wishes that the knocking could wake up Duncan. I think Macbeth, if he could go back in time, he would not kill Duncan. If he could, he would bring Duncan back to life, even if it meant the him getting caught. I can't remember if I mentioned it in any of their videos, but like if you do a word count of specific words in the play of Macbeth, the word do and the word deed pop up like 457 times. They are in there a lot, and it can't just be accident. And it comes down to this idea that there are some things that when you do them, they cannot be undone. And then you have to live with what you did. And if I'm being honest and may opine for a moment here before I call an end to this, because I need to go and teach my 4th period class, I'll pick up another video to do the rest of Act 2. I wish I had known that when I was younger. I did some profoundly stupid things and hurt people who cared about me. And I didn't think about it at the time that I was going to have to live the rest of my life with the fact that I did those things. There's still a reason why we teach this stuff in high school. I hope you guys understand. All right, I'll pick up the next section for Act 3, Scene 3. Act 2, Scene 3. Dang, man, I'm on fire today with numbers. I'll pick up the rest of the action in another video. Sadly, I am not going to be able to complete the process today because I talk too darn much. But we'll stop our recording. And then we'll pick it up next time. Maybe. Hey, struggling with the technology here. Sorry, team. I used to know how to stop a recording. I hope it's been recording and I didn't just waste everything.